Teresa Smith, also known as Tanti and Fan, of Marley St. Patrick, who resided at Darbo St. George, passed away on Friday 3rd March 2023. She was the mother of Dean Mitchell, Charmaine Ferguson, Willan and Richard Smith in Canada, and Tessa Smith in Grenada, grandmother of Akim and Hamid Fleming, Donnell Biko Mitchell, Giselle Brooks, Jacqueline and Alicia Ferguson, Christopher and Antonio Mitchell, Sharon Smith, Junior Strawn, Shanaika Smith, Christian Young, Nicole Smith and Ralph Joseph, great-grandmother of 16, mother-in-law of Ralph Happy Joseph, Leroy, Kathian, Liglaceria and Cecil. Many brothers and sisters, including the Smart family of Monktrich and Althea Jones of Marley. Nieces and nephews, including Peter Govis Jones, Gosling Matthew, and Lauren Regis. Many cousins, other relatives and close friends, including the Bedeau family in Carriacou and Grenada, the Joseph family of Brazan, Dr. Caliste, Jacqueline Phillip and family, Miss Evans and family, Pearl Patterson, and friends and neighbours of Darbo and surrounding areas. The funeral of the late Teresa Smith, also known as Tanti and Fan, of Marley St. Patrick, who resided at Darbo St. George, will take place on Tuesday 28th March at 1 p.m. Funeral service will be held at the Garden of Remembrance Funeral Chapel, Cemetery Hill St. George's, according to Roman Catholic rites, and interment will be at the Wilberforce Cemetery. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Lacqua Brothers Funeral Home. Diane Yvonne Murrell Herbert, also known as Auntie D, of North Carolina, USA, who resided at Croton Drive, Monkpanarsa, St. George, and White Plains, New York, in the USA, passed away on Friday 17th March 2023, at the age of 73, left to mourn her husband Alan Herbert, beloved pet Happy Herbert, sisters and brother Marilyn Cassandra Murrell, Evelyn Boyd, Joyce Andrews, and Ricky Sparrow, all residing in the USA. Mother-in-law Agnes Herbert. Many nieces, nephews, cousins, in-laws, close friends, church and spiritual family members, and neighbors of the Croton Drive, Monkpanarsis area, far too numerous to mention. The funeral of the late Diane Yvonne Murrell Herbert, also known as Auntie D of North Carolina, USA, who resided at Croton Drive, Monkpanarsis, and White Plains, New York, USA, will take place on Wednesday 29th March at 1 p.m. Funeral service will be held at Bailey's Chapel, Coronage, St. George's, followed by private interment. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Bailey's Funeral Home. Junior Jason Hostin of Trinidad, who resided at Lower Coast Guard St. Mark, passed away on Saturday 18th March 2023 at the age of 45. He was the son of Lema Hostin of Coast Guard, grandson of Wilma Charles in the United Kingdom, nephew of Moland Frederick and Diane Hostin in the UK, and Louisa Augustine. Many relatives including Maudlin Braffett, Claude Alexander, Arga Alexander, Nicholas Young, Dora St. Bernard, Dorette Bowler, Basil Alexander, Stacey Peters, Michael Frederick, Vero and Asher Augustine in Grenada, Dennis Frederick, Collins Alexander in Trinidad, Alan Alexander, Suzanne McIntosh, Cyprian Bowler and Raphael John in the USA, Aaliyah Huston, Ian Alexander, and Leroy Augustine in the United Kingdom. Many other family and friends including Cynthia Bonaparte, Teresa Edwards, Stephen Frederick, Aston Tika, Rosalind Crosby, Ursula Phillip, Merle James, Samuel Phillip, the Alexander, Bonaparte, Hostin, James, Julian, Augustine, Philip, and Barry families, and friends and neighbors of Coast Guard and surrounding areas. The funeral service for the late Junior Jason Hostin of Trinidad, who resided at Lower Coast Guard St. Mark, will take place on Thursday, March 30th at 2 p.m. Funeral service will be held at the St. Mark the Evangelist Catholic Church, Victoria, and interment will be at the Coast Guard Cemetery. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Lacqua Brothers Funeral Home. Anne Monica Francis, also known as Tanti Anne, of Laurelland, St. David, passed away on Friday 10th March 2023 at the age of 65. She was the mother of Kenny Francis, also known as Ken, Kellen Francis, Curlon Francis, and Andel Francis. Grandmother of 14, including Kiomel, Jahim, Kiana, Kerlona, Kahim, Kareem, Kali, Kishona, Kyla, Caden, and Jaquan. Sister of Royston Francis, also known as Guy, Gracie Francis Telesford, Denise Catherine Francis, Osbert Francis, also known as Browncoat, Winston Francis, also known as Scratch, Elizabeth Francis, also known as Lizzie, Peter Angus Francis, also known as Angie, and Benedict Williams. Niece of Doris, John, Cynthia, and Hamilton Licorice. Aunt of 31, including Catasia, Nympha, Lisa, Candia, Kizzy, Arisha, Brent, Stefan, Kenyon, Oswin, and AJ. Mother-in-law of Tanisha Francis. Sister-in-law of Doreen Francis and David Telesford. Caregivers Miss Dessa and Belinda. Many other relatives and friends, including the Francis and James families of Pedmotar, Bocatee and siblings of Laurelland, the Leslie family of St. Paul's, Clement Gabriel and siblings of Pedmotar, the Gilbert family of Petit Buckeye, the Licorice family of Corinth and Providence, Pastor Selwyn and Sister Angela Haling and members of the Garden of Prayer, the Blackett family of Beaton, Anthony Telesford, Dr. Devon Francis, Nurse Cox, co-workers at the SSU camp, Tasha, Sandra, Joy, Dominic, Joan Cutane, and neighbors and friends of Laurelland and surrounding areas. The funeral of the late Anne Monica Francis, also known as Tanti Anne, of Laurelland St. David, will take place on Friday, March 31st at 1:30 p.m. Funeral service will be held at the Garden of Prayer, St. Paul's, and entombment will be at the Mount Airy Cemetery. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Lackwell Brothers Funeral Home. Asher McIntyre of Mount Hartman, Grandon, St. George, died on Monday, March 6, 2023, at the age of 32. He was the son of Deborah McIntyre residing in the USA and Sylvan McIntyre, brother of Ali in the USA, Aiden in Germany, and Surag, grandson of Benedict McIntyre, brother-in-law of Sasha Victor McIntyre residing in the USA, nephew of Grace Garraway in the USA, Remy Peters, Cynthia Victor, Patsy, Charmaine and Ann Blackett, Anthea George, Rosalind Bell in Aruba, Decima and Sally Ann Noel in the USA, Bishop Eric Joseph in the US, Ken Joseph, Godfrey Frederick, Justin, Cuthbert and Pastor Arthur Blackett, Christopher and Anthony Blackett in the USA. Many relatives and friends, including Pauline and Dawn Peters, Shalisha Blackett, Caleb, Glenisha, Max, Sabrina, Cassie, Avonelle and Thera, the basketball brothers of the Carenage, Grandons and Labrie, the Blackett and Peters families of Beaton and in the US, the McIntyre families in Grenada, the USA, Canada, Jamaica and Trinidad, the George family of Westerhall, the Hector family of St. Paul's, the Gabriel family of St. David, the management and staff of Best of Grenada, Radisson Beach Resort, Custom Brokers and Port Authority, the communities of Mount Hartman, Grandons and Beaton. Many other family and friends too numerous to mention. The funeral service for the late Asher McIntyre of Mount Hartman, Grandon, St. George will take place on Monday, April 3rd with viewing starting at 11 a.m. and tributes at 12:30 p.m. Funeral service will be held at the Gateway Assembly, Point Celine, St. George, and entombment will be at the Grandon Cemetery. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Bailey's Funeral Home. Phyllis Ann Charles of Caливini passed away on Monday, 13th March 2023, at the age of 63. She was the mother of Kevin Charles, also known as Yellow, and Brandon Charles, also known as Tafari, grandmother of Kezzy Charles and Angel Charles, sister of Marcia and Sherry Cador, Sandra Cador Connaught, Antoinette and Lisa Cador, Bronte Boyce, and Brondell Charles, aunt of Randy Connaught Jr., Andrew James, Kim Nasher Cador, Roshan Connaught, Brianna James, Javern, Stephanie, and Elisa Cador, sister-in-law of ACP Randy Connaught, niece of Veronica Maffio, Eileen, Joel, and Alston Cador. Many relatives and friends, including Rebecca Belgrave, Lillian Sylvester, Rita Charles, Julietta Simmons, Chiffon Catherine Cador, the Cador family of Mount Plaisir, Grandroy, Concord and Beaulieu, the Charles family of Marianne, and friends and neighbours of Calavini and surrounding areas. The funeral of the late Phyllis Ann Charles of Calavini St. George will take place on Tuesday, April 4th at 1 p.m. Funeral service will be held at the St. George's Seventh-day Adventist Church, Archibald Avenue, and interment will be at the St. George's Centre Cemetery. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Lacqua Brothers Funeral Home. Cuthbert B. Alexis, also known as Baker and Cutty, of Richmond St. Andrew, passed away on Friday 24th March 2023 at the age of 82. The funeral arrangements for the late Cuthbert B. Alexis, also known as Baker and Cutty, of Richmond St. Andrew, will be given in a subsequent broadcast. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Lacqua Brothers Funeral Home. Jonathan Richards, also known as Not Nice and J, of Edward Street, Grove, St. John, passed away on Tuesday 21st March 2023 at the age of 28. The funeral arrangements for the late Jonathan Richards, also known as Not Nice and J, of Edward Street, Grove, St. John, will be given in a subsequent broadcast. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Bailey's Funeral Home. Linda Noel, also known as Becca, of Corinth, who resided at Mardi Gras St. David, passed away on Monday, March 20th, 2023, at the age of 65. The funeral arrangements for the late Linda Noel, also known as Becca, of Corinth, who resided at Mardi Gras St. David, will be given in a subsequent broadcast. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Lacqua Brothers Funeral Home. Carl Wilson of Springs, who resided at Point Celine St. George, proprietor of Point Celine Hotel or Fox Inn, passed away on Tuesday 21st March 2023 at the age of 77. The funeral arrangements for the late Carl Wilson of Springs, who resided at Point Celine St. George, will be given in a subsequent broadcast. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Lacqua Brothers Funeral Home. Abigail Mary Sandy of the Villa St. George passed away on Monday, March 20th, 2023, at the age of 84. The funeral arrangements for the late Abigail Mary Sandy of the Villa St. George will be given in a subsequent broadcast. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Bailey's Funeral Home. Edward Chase, also known as Robertson Redhead, Zip and Barber, of Beausejour St. George, passed away on Sunday, March 19th, 2023, at the age of 77. The funeral arrangements for the late Edward Chase, also known as Robertson Redhead, Zip and Barber, of Beausejour St. George, will be given in a subsequent broadcast. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Lacqua Brothers Funeral Home. Marlene Ford, also known as Mammerts of Fontenoy St. George, passed away on Tuesday, March 14th, 2023 in the USA, at the age of 74. The funeral arrangements for the late Marlene Ford, also known as Mammerts of Fontenoy St. George, will be given in a subsequent broadcast. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Lacqua Brothers Funeral Home. Reginald Pear of Westerhall Point St. David passed away on Tuesday, March 22nd, 2023, at the age of 90. The funeral arrangements for the late Reginald Pear of Westerhall Point St. David will be given in a subsequent broadcast. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Bailey's Funeral Home. Vernetta Anastasia Gilbert of Woodland St. George passed away on Sunday, 12th March 2023, at the age of 66. The funeral arrangements for the late Vernetta Anastasia Gilbert of Woodland St. George will be given in a subsequent broadcast. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Lacqua Brothers Funeral Home.
The management and staff of MTV extend deepest condolences to those of you whose loved ones have passed on. Thank you for watching.
I am Godwill James, an MD and a member of Gateway Assembly. Medically, death is regarded as an end or a cessation of life. Different groups view death in different perspectives. While some regard death as a continuation of life, others view it as an infeeble form of life. As a Christian, we may want to view death as a separation of the soul from the body. So, whichever way one may view death, I want to say that may the gentle soul of the faithful departed rest in the bosom of the Lord. Amen.